When my parents met, it was like the mid 70s and the end of the Vietnam War. My dad had signed up to enlist in the military when he was 16 because his childhood was so bad, like so bad. They were beyond poor. Both my parents were born in 1956, but my mom grew up fairly wealthy and or middle class at least. And my dad grew up beyond poor. They didn't have shoes going to school. He was the oldest of 10 kids and in Nebraska. And one of his stories was that the nurse at school had taken him and all of his siblings to go get shoes because they didn't have shoes at school. And so his dad, my grandfather, was highly abusive. The grandmother, highly abusive. Most of his siblings are either not with us anymore or missing. Like there's a couple, few, I don't know how many are left and I've spoken to one because she connected with me through Ancestry. But the family was just so toxic that my dad was absolutely not. We're not going to have any relationship with them. But that wasn't till I was about 2. But I've never met my grandparents on my dad's side. It was just so physically and intimately, we're on social media, intimately abusive, like in every possible way. And my dad had a big lump on his nose from where his dad had pushed his head through a mattress. And it was just, he wanted to get away. So the military it was, and he lied about something and got in, and he ended up meeting, I think he was in the military with my cousin, my great cousin. Is that a great cousin? What is that? So it's my mom's cousin. That's second cousin, maybe? I don't know. I don't have enough family to know what these things are. So they met through him and they just fell in love. It was different for my mom. It was different than everything she'd ever known. And my dad was so deeply empathetic on the inside, but he was plagued and tormented by just so many demons because of his childhood, and they didn't have healing stuff back then. Back in the 70s, there was no such thing as mental health, and that's very real. There's a different, the world's evolved, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. But they met and they fell in love, and it was the 70s, and I don't know much. My mom didn't tell me much because she just said they partied a lot, and it was really super trippy. And they got married on his birthday in 76, and then they got pregnant with me. It must have been 78 because I was born in May of 79, but they were living in Orville, California at the time. And my mom was just always so tickled by the funniest things. They drove to Paradise, California while my mom was in labor so I could say my entire life that I was born in Paradise. And then to top it off, on my birth certificate, the doctor that delivered me was Dr. Filler Up. I love silly names and all kinds of, I don't know, it's just fun. So my parents were totally hippies, like anti-war, really anti-everything. They were very unconventional, did not fit in the box, very much TISM all the way through them. And it's quite interesting because as I've studied human design, both my parents are cross of the sleeping phoenix, and that is the era that we're moving into in the beginning of 2027. We're moving from the cross of planning into the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And so being raised by my parents really just kind of has bred me for this new, different era that we're moving into. And I think that's why vulnerability and just using my intuition, knowing myself is so much of who I am and what I've always known, because I wasn't conditioned the way other people were conditioned, because my parents were very counterculture. And it just gave me a different perspective on life. Ooh, big trains. They're moving all the trains around. So my dad loved nature. He loved hunting and fishing, and that was how we ate most of my childhood. And so the stories from when we lived in California, when I was still under the age of 2, was he would go down to the Sacramento River and use these big old treble hooks and snag salmon, and he would bring them home, and he loved to scare my mother. He would put, a great big, like 4-foot salmon over the top of the shower curtain and just, here, fishy, fishy, fishy. And he was ornery and funny, and they were always pranking each other in some weird, fucked up way, and it was funny. So she would can salmon, and he killed everything, and we ate it all. And he would use all of it. That was just literally how my young years were. There was one time, because we left California when I was about 2 or 3, and moved to Houston during the big Houston boom, where Houston was really just turning into a city. It was being developed in the early 80s, and my dad was in construction. So we moved to Houston, and that was where I was essayed for 2 years. We lived in a KOA, and it's a KOA. What is a KOA? It's a campground. It's where travel trailers, we were old school, white trash. That's where we did the tiny living way before it was cool. But we lived in a KOA, and there were 3 neighbor boys. Their mom was great friends with my mom. The trailers are just parked and lined up, and they had little outside sitting areas, and they just were great friends, and they cared about each other. And my mom didn't even notice when her 3 sons started essaying me, and I didn't know it was wrong. And so many people who have been hurt in that way, it's like you don't know it's wrong. It was painted to me as love, and that was all I knew for many years, was this was just what people do. My mom never had that experience in her childhood, so she didn't know. Oh goodness, sorry it's so loud. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't know how to recognize it. Nobody was talking about SA back in 1983, 1984. That wasn't a thing that anyone was talking about. So my mom didn't know the signs to look for. And in hindsight, I can see that these were brothers. They were 13, 15, 19-ish years old. And it did a lot of damage in me for a lot of years. But as I healed, I realized that, a 13-year-old just doesn't wake up one day and go, geez, I'm bored of playing Atari, and I'm going to go, do the girl next door, the 4-year-old. If someone was showing them love in the same way they were showing me love, and none of that is okay, it just makes it more understandable. And I have found that as I've shared this part of my story very publicly over the years, that's a really common experience for people, is that we internalize it, we think it's our fault, we think we did something, and we didn't. There just wasn't education, there wasn't protection, we didn't know what to look for, and silence truly is violence. Silence does not stop things from happening. We must use our voices, we must share, and that's the only way these cycles stop. The reason we left there was because there was another little girl that they ran the campground, and the laundromat was up on the top of the hill, and the little girl was in a truck by herself, and she pulled it out of gear, and it rolled backwards all the way down this hill and hit our trailer. And I was actually sitting at the table eating something, and she hit right where my back was. And it was terrifying. It moved the trailer many feet. It was just feet from the propane tanks. It destroyed the entire trailer. And my mom, frantic, walking on glass, was just pulling me out of there. It was quite an ordeal. I had a little dog that was like a Chihuahua, but it was very much, she was mixed with everything. She was kind of, she was very free. She had a good time everywhere we went, but her chain was down to just 6 inches, and it had pulled her chain up, and so we ended up leaving that KOA because of that accident. And for some reason, I was totally fine. I wasn't injured at all. My mom was hurt more from walking on the glass, but we ended up leaving there and getting another trailer. And moving up to Oklahoma, and that's where the Turtle McNuggets happened. So we're going to do that on the next video.